On the morning of July 28, 1984, Judy Ellen Weichert, a 34-year-old Oklahoma City resident, embarked on what should have been a routine jog along North Sarah Road. Judy was an avid runner and dedicated athlete who was training for a marathon. She had planned to complete a challenging 16-mile run that day. Leaving her home around 7:30 a.m., she set off alone as her husband, Steve, decided to sleep in rather than join her. Tragically, this decision marked the beginning of a series of events that would lead to a haunting, unsolved murder. Judy's route took her through quiet backroads near Sundance Air Park, a rural area largely devoid of traffic and activity. At some point during her run, likely within an hour or two, she was viciously attacked by an unknown assailant. The man, described later by Judy herself as a white male driving a blue car, raped and stabbed her repeatedly. The attack was brutal. Judy sustained 23 stab wounds concentrated on her face, neck, and chest, injuries that were nearly impossible to survive. After the assault, her attacker left her for dead in a desolate field near Sarah Road and Northwest Highway. Despite the severity of her injuries, Judy demonstrated extraordinary strength and determination in her final moments. Gathering what little strength she had left, she managed to crawl approximately 50 feet toward the roadside. For over an hour, Judy lay bleeding near the road as cars passed by, unaware of her presence just feet away. At approximately 9:45 a.m., more than 2 hours after she had left home for her jog, Judy's nearly lifeless body was discovered by two passers-by, a mother and daughter driving along Sarah Road. The pair stopped immediately upon seeing her and attempted to provide assistance. One of them rushed to find the nearest phone to call emergency services, while the other stayed with Judy. Despite being barely able to speak due to the extent of her injuries, Judy used her remaining strength to describe her attacker to the woman who stayed by her side. She identified him as a white man driving a blue car, a critical detail that would later guide investigators in their search for suspects. Emergency responders arrived swiftly and transported Judy to Mercy Health Center in Oklahoma City. Upon admission, doctors noted that she was barely clinging to life. Surgeons worked tirelessly in an attempt to stabilize her condition. However, the severity of her wounds proved insurmountable. At approximately 1:40 p.m., roughly 4 hours after being discovered, Judy succumbed to her injuries during surgery. Her funeral was held at Resurrection Cemetery Chapel in Oklahoma City just days later. Friends and family gathered to mourn the loss of a woman described as kind-hearted and full of life. Her grieving husband placed a marble headstone nearby engraved with the words, "My Golden Runner," alongside an image of a female runner and an armadillo. A task force was immediately formed to oversee the case, which police initially believed would be solved quickly given Judy's description of her attacker and his vehicle. Authorities issued public warnings urging women not to jog alone in isolated areas and offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction. The task force's first step was to canvass the area extensively in search of witnesses or evidence that might shed light on what had happened that morning. Investigators interviewed over 1,000 individuals as part of their efforts, including more than 350 people who were considered persons of interest due to their proximity to the crime scene or other suspicious behavior. Among these individuals were roughly 400 owners of blue Volkswagen Beetles, a vehicle believed to match witness descriptions of the suspect's car. Despite these exhaustive efforts, no arrests were made in the immediate aftermath of Judy's murder. Investigators faced several challenges that hindered their progress. For one, forensic technology in 1984 was limited compared to modern standards. While DNA evidence was collected from Judy's body and clothing at the time of the attack, it could not be analyzed with precision until years later when advancements in forensic science became available. Additionally, leads generated by witness statements and tips from the public often led investigators down dead ends or diverted attention from more promising avenues of inquiry. For example, early suspicions fell on Judy's husband, Steve, simply because he was one of the last people to see her alive. However, he was quickly ruled out as a suspect based on both physical evidence and Judy's own description of her attacker as a stranger. As weeks turned into months without significant breakthroughs, public interest in the case began to wane. By its second year, only 2 investigators remained actively working on what had initially been treated as one of Oklahoma City's highest priority cases. Despite their persistence, no suspects were taken into custody or charged with the crimes. During their canvassing efforts, investigators received reports about a suspicious man seen near Sarah Road on July 28, 1984, the day of Judy's murder. Witnesses described him as a white male in his late 20s or early 30s with long, dirty blonde hair. He reportedly stood between 5'10" and 6 feet tall and had a slender build. Some witnesses also noted that he drove a faded blue Volkswagen Beetle and possibly had a circular tattoo on his upper left shoulder. This individual seemed to fit Judy's description of her attacker closely. However, despite extensive efforts to locate him, police were unable to identify or apprehend this man. He remains one of the most intriguing yet elusive leads in the case. Less than a year after Judy's murder, another violent crime occurred in Oklahoma City that investigators believed might be connected to her case. In May 1985, a woman returning home during her lunch break interrupted what appeared to be a burglary in progress at her apartment complex. The intruder overpowered her, stabbed her with what police theorized was a meat fork, and her before fleeing. The survivor provided police with a description of her attacker, which led them to Jeffrey Todd Pierce, a landscaper working at the apartment complex where the assault took place. Pierce became a suspect not only in this case but also in Judy's murder due to similarities between the crimes and circumstantial evidence tying him to both incidents. He was then arrested in connection with the May 1985 sexual assault after being identified by the victim during a photo lineup. Police claimed that forensic evidence linked him to the crime scene, specifically hair samples analyzed by Joyce Gilchrist, a forensic chemist whose testimony had been pivotal in numerous convictions at the time. Joyce asserted that Pierce's hair matched samples found at the scene. Pierce was convicted and sentenced to 65 years in prison for the assault, despite maintaining his innocence throughout the trial. He was not charged with anything in regards to Judy's case due to a lack of evidence. Years later, advancements in DNA technology exposed flaws in Joyce's forensic analysis. Testing revealed that Pierce's DNA did not match evidence from either crime scene, the May 1985 assault or Judy's murder. In 2001, Pierce was exonerated after spending nearly 15 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit. This revelation casts doubt not only on Joyce's credibility, but also on the integrity of Oklahoma City's forensic practices during that era. On February 28, 1989, the quiet village of Miyakaji in Fukushima Prefecture became the setting for one of Japan's most unsettling mysteries. Yumi Tanaka, a 23-year-old elementary school teacher, had just finished her workday and returned to her dormitory, which was located near the school. The dorm was a modest structure with basic facilities, including a squat-style toilet connected to a septic tank. It was a cold winter evening, and as Tanaka entered her bathroom, she noticed something unusual in the toilet bowl: a shoe. At first, she thought it might have been a prank or an animal that had somehow dragged the shoe into the toilet. However, upon closer inspection, she realized that the shoe was not floating but firmly lodged in place. Alarmed by this discovery, Tanaka decided to investigate further. She stepped outside to check the septic tank connected to her restroom. When she opened the lid of the tank, she was met with a horrifying sight: human legs protruding from the waste-filled pipe. Shocked and terrified, she screamed for help, which brought her colleagues rushing to the scene. The local authorities were promptly called to investigate. When they arrived, they found that the body was wedged horizontally inside the U-shaped septic pipe beneath the toilet. The confined space made it impossible to remove the body without dismantling parts of the bathroom structure. Firefighters were eventually called in to assist with extracting the body, which required drilling through sections of the pipeline. After hours of effort, they managed to retrieve the remains. The body was identified as Naoyuki Kano, a 26-year-old man who had been missing for 4 days. Naoyuki's family had reported his disappearance after he failed to return home on February 24th following a routine outing. He had told his father that he was heading out to run errands but did not specify where he was going or when he would return. His car was later found abandoned near a farm close to Tanaka's dormitory, with its keys still in the ignition and its doors unlocked. The body was found in a bizarre position within the septic tank. The man was lying on his back with his knees bent upward and his face oriented toward the toilet opening inside Tanaka's bathroom. He was topless and barefoot, but clutching a neatly folded jacket or shirt against his chest, a detail that puzzled investigators since it seemed improbable for him to have folded it while trapped in such a confined and filthy space. One of his shoes was discovered near his head inside the tank, while the other shoe was found much later on a riverbank some distance away from the scene. The septic tank itself added another layer of mystery to Naoyuki's death. The outdoor opening of the tank measured only 14 inches in diameter, too small for an adult man of Naoyuki's size to enter without significant force or injury. He stood at 5 feet 7 inches tall with an average shoulder width of about 16 inches. The squatting pan inside the toilet had an even smaller opening of just 8 inches, ruling out entry from that direction entirely. These dimensions left investigators baffled as to how Naoyuki could have ended up inside the tank at all. Adding to the confusion were several peculiar details surrounding Naoyuki's disappearance and discovery. His car being left unlocked with its keys inside suggested he had intended to return shortly after leaving it behind. The fact that one shoe was found far from the scene raised questions about whether someone else might have been involved in moving or discarding it. Furthermore, Tanaka's initial discovery of the shoe in her toilet bowl seemed unusual given how poorly lit her bathroom would have been at night. After Naoyuki's body was extracted from the septic tank and thoroughly cleaned, forensic examiners determined that Naoyuki had died on February 26, 1989, 2 days before his body was discovered. The official cause of death was ruled as hypothermia, compounded by a thoracic circulation disorder caused by his position in the septic tank. However, the absence of significant injuries or signs of foul play left investigators and the public puzzled. Police ultimately concluded that Naoyuki had entered the septic tank voluntarily as part of a voyeuristic act and died from hypothermia after becoming trapped. This explanation sparked outrage among villagers and Naoyuki's family, who knew him as a responsible and sociable individual with no history of voyeurism or deviant behavior. Over 4,000 villagers signed a petition demanding police reopen the case, but the request was denied due to insufficient evidence of foul play. Another argument that was brought up against the voyeurism gone wrong conclusion was the shoddy timeline. The teacher whose toilet was connected to the septic tank had been away from her dorm between February 24th and February 27th due to Emperor Hirohito's funeral, a national holiday. If voyeurism were Naoyuki's motive, it seems unlikely that he would enter the tank during a period when no one was present to use the restroom. One widely discussed theory is that Naoyuki was murdered and placed in the septic tank either before or after his death. Proponents of this theory point to several suspicious details that suggest foul play. One key piece of evidence is Naoyuki's lack of significant injuries. While police argued that this indicated he entered voluntarily, others believe it suggests he may have been subdued or killed elsewhere before being placed in the tank. The absence of defensive wounds or bruises could indicate that he was incapacitated either through physical restraint or poisoning prior to his body being disposed of. The discovery of one of Naoyuki's shoes far from the scene adds further weight to this theory. If he had entered the septic tank willingly, it is unclear why one shoe would be found miles away on a riverbank. This detail suggests either a struggle or an attempt by someone else to obscure evidence. Some have speculated that Yumi Tanaka or her boyfriend may have been involved in Naoyuki's death. Tanaka knew Naoyuki personally and claimed he had assisted her with harassment issues prior to his disappearance. Critics have questioned why she ventured outside to check the septic tank lid in the dark after noticing a shoe in her toilet bowl, a detail some find suspicious given how poorly lit her bathroom area would have been at night. However, there is no direct evidence linking Tanaka or her boyfriend to Naoyuki's death, and both denied any involvement. Another theory suggests a political assassination. Naoyuki worked as a manager at a nuclear power plant and was involved in local politics. This has led some to theorize that his death was politically motivated. At the time of his disappearance, a mayoral election was taking place in Miyakaji village. Naoyuki initially supported Tadashiro Watanabe, a candidate who favored nuclear plant expansion plans for economic growth. However, shortly before his death, Naoyuki reportedly withdrew his support after discovering that Watanabe had been engaging in vote-buying schemes. This withdrawal may have made Naoyuki a target for political retaliation. Some locals believe Watanabe or his supporters orchestrated Naoyuki's death to silence him and prevent him from exposing their corrupt practices. The timing of Naoyuki's disappearance just days before the election has fueled these suspicions. Another variation of this theory involves opposing forces within the election who sought to expand Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant operations further into Miyakaji village. Reports suggest that Naoyuki opposed these plans due to concerns about potential health risks associated with reactor expansion. Some believe that powerful individuals within the nuclear industry viewed him as an obstacle and eliminated him to protect their interests. Adding credence to these theories is an incident involving one of Naoyuki's co-workers at the nuclear plant who died under suspicious circumstances shortly before Naoyuki's disappearance. This co-worker had reportedly uncovered safety violations within reactor operations, a discovery that coincided with a nuclear leak at Fukushima Daiichi around the same time. In February 2019, scientists and conservationists were left baffled by the discovery of a dead humpback whale in an unexpected location, the Amazon rainforest. The whale's carcass was found on Marajo Island near the mouth of the Amazon River in Brazil, approximately 15 meters inland in a dense mangrove forest. This peculiar incident sparked widespread curiosity and scientific investigation as researchers sought to understand how a marine animal ended up so far from its natural habitat. The whale was discovered by researchers from the Bicho de Agua Institute after scavenging birds of prey led them to the site. The carcass measured approximately 8 meters in length and weighed about 10 tons, indicating that it was a juvenile calf, likely no more than a year old. Its location deep within a mangrove swamp made the discovery even more odd, as humpback whales are typically found in open ocean waters rather than inland environments. Upon inspection, the whale showed no visible signs of trauma, such as injuries from fishing nets or ship strikes, leaving its cause of death unclear. Researchers collected samples for necropsy to determine what might have caused the whale's death and how it ended up in such an unusual location. Adding to the mystery was the timing of the discovery. Humpback whales are commonly observed along Brazil's southern Bahia coast between August and November during their annual migration from Antarctic feeding grounds to tropical breeding areas. However, this whale was found far north near the mouth of the Amazon River during February, a time when humpback whales are typically absent from this region. One theory suggests that this calf may have become separated from its mother during migration, which could have caused it to stray into unfamiliar waters. Juvenile whales are particularly vulnerable to disorientation and environmental challenges when traveling without maternal guidance. The most plausible explanation for how the whale ended up inland is that it was already dead when strong tides or storm surges carried its body ashore. Marajo Island experiences significant tidal fluctuations, with some tides reaching over 7 meters. These powerful tides could have propelled the carcass into the mangrove forest. Additionally, high tides under a full moon may have amplified these conditions, pushing the whale further inland than would normally be expected. Another possibility is that rough seas during stormy weather played a role in transporting the carcass into such an unusual location. Once inside the mangrove forest, the dense network of roots likely trapped the body, preventing it from being washed back out to sea. While researchers have not yet determined an exact cause of death, several theories have been proposed. One possibility is that the young whale starved or got ill after being separated from its mother during migration. As juvenile whales rely heavily on their mothers for nutrition and protection, separation could have left it vulnerable. Another theory suggests that marine pollution may have played a role. Ingestion of plastic waste is a growing problem for marine animals and could have contributed to this calf's death. The Dominici affair is one of the most perplexing and controversial murder cases in French history. It revolves around the brutal slaying of a British family in 1952 near a rural farm in Provence. Despite extensive investigations and a high-profile trial, the case remains unresolved, shrouded in contradictory evidence, unreliable confessions, and allegations of procedural misconduct. On the night of August 4th, 1952, a horrific crime unfolded in the quiet countryside near the village of Lurs in southeastern France. Sir Jack Drummond, a prominent British biochemist, his wife Lady Anne, and their 10-year-old daughter Elizabeth were brutally murdered while camping by the roadside near La Grande-Terre, a farm owned by the Dominici family. The murders shocked both France and Britain, becoming one of the most infamous criminal cases of the 20th century. The Drummonds had been traveling through France on a summer holiday in their green Hillman estate car. On the evening of August 4th, they stopped along National Highway 96, approximately 165 meters from La Grande-Terre. The site was situated near a railway bridge and a path that led down to the banks of the Durance River. The family parked their car in a lay-by and set up camp for the night. This seemingly normal location would soon become the scene of a gruesome triple homicide. The killings were savage and chaotic, suggesting an act of rage rather than premeditation. Based on forensic evidence and witness accounts, it is believed that the attack occurred sometime after midnight. Around 1:10 a.m., multiple gunshots were heard by locals, though this was initially dismissed as poachers hunting in the area, a common occurrence at the time. Jack Drummond was shot first. His body was found on one side of the road opposite the family's car. It appeared he had staggered across the road after being shot, possibly in an attempt to escape or confront his assailant. Anne Drummond was found near the car lying on her back with fatal gunshot wounds. Both were killed with a .30 caliber M1 carbine rifle. Elizabeth Drummond suffered an even more brutal fate. Her body was discovered approximately 77 meters away from the campsite along a path leading toward the river. She had been bludgeoned to death with the stock of the same rifle used to kill her parents. The force of the blows was so severe that it broke the rifle's stock, which was later recovered downstream in the river alongside its barrel. A camp bed was found leaning against the car, and various items appeared to have been disturbed or moved during or after the attack. Witness accounts from early morning passers-by noted changes to the arrangement of objects at the scene, suggesting tampering either by locals or those involved in the crime. At around 5:30 a.m. on August 5th, Gustave Dominici, one of Gaston's sons, claimed to have discovered Elizabeth's body while inspecting an irrigation pump near La Grande-Terre. He later flagged down Jean-Marie Olivier, a passing motorcyclist, and asked him to inform local authorities about what he had found. Gustave also pointed authorities to where Jack's and Anne's bodies lay. However, Gustave's behavior raised immediate suspicions. He owned a motorcycle but chose not to ride it himself to alert police, instead relying on Olivier. Furthermore, his initial statements were inconsistent and contradictory. He claimed he had heard gunshots around 1:30 a.m., which he attributed to poachers but did not investigate further at the time. He also admitted that Elizabeth was still alive when he found her but failed to explain why he did not seek immediate medical assistance for her. It is widely believed that some form of interaction occurred between the Drummonds and members of the Dominici family before the murders took place. Anne reportedly visited La Grande-Terre earlier on August 4th to ask for water, possibly for their car radiator or for drinking purposes, though members of the Dominicis initially denied this encounter during police questioning. The family had been hosting a harvest celebration at their farm on August 4th, with friends and relatives visiting throughout the evening. This gathering likely increased activity around La Grande-Terre that night. Some theorists suggest that tensions may have arisen between members of both families during this time, though no concrete evidence supports this claim. The motive behind these killings remains unclear. Initial theories suggested robbery as a possible explanation. However, no significant valuables appeared to be missing from either the Drummonds' belongings or their car. Other theories pointed toward personal animosity or an altercation gone wrong between members of both families. One of the most significant issues with the initial investigation was the contamination of the crime scene. Curious locals and reporters flocked to La Grande-Terre upon hearing news of the murders, trampling over potential evidence before police could secure it. Captain Albert, one of the first officers on site, failed to tape off or contain the area effectively. This allowed onlookers to disturb items at the scene and handle evidence without gloves or proper precautions. Several witnesses provided accounts that shaped early theories about what had happened. Faustin Rura, traveling by moped early on August 5th, noted seeing Clovis Dominici and Marcel Boyer riding bicycles near La Grande-Terre. Faustin later revealed that Boyer had stopped at the scene when Elizabeth's body was discovered, but initially lied about his presence during police questioning. Investigators also noted several troubling statements from Gaston Dominici. For instance, he reportedly mentioned that Anne, quote, died instantly, raising questions about how he could know this detail unless he had witnessed or participated in her murder. Furthermore, during initial questioning, he mimed shooting and reloading a gun as if using a single-shot hunting shotgun, a weapon inconsistent with the one used in the killings. Superintendent Sebea met Gaston for the first time on August 5th near where Elizabeth's body had been found earlier that day. Sabile formed an unfavorable impression based on the man's tattoos and mannerisms, which he interpreted as signs of dishonesty or criminality. This bias would influence subsequent interrogations and decisions about Gaston's involvement. He had a reputation of being both stubborn and fiercely protective of his family. During questioning by police, Gaston confessed multiple times to committing the murders but retracted his statements just as frequently. His confessions were inconsistent and often implausible. In one version of events, he claimed he had approached Anne during the night with intentions. According to this account, a confrontation ensued during which Gaston killed Jack and Anne before bludgeoning Elizabeth to death as she tried to escape. This story was widely discredited due to its improbability. Gaston was elderly, walked with a cane, and wore hobnailed boots, none of which matched evidence found at the crime scene. Additionally, forensic analysis showed that the wounds inflicted on the victims did not align with Gaston's descriptions. In another confession, he claimed he had seen his son Gustave dragging Elizabeth's body into a hayfield after killing her parents. This accusation added further complexity to an already convoluted case. Gustave denied his father's claims, but later recanted some of his own statements under pressure from investigators. Despite these inconsistencies, investigators and prosecutors relied heavily on Gaston's confessions during his trial in 1954. The court accepted them as evidence of his guilt despite their contradictions and lack of corroborating forensic proof. As if this confusion was not enough, other members of the family became embroiled in a web of accusations against one another. In fact, one of the driving forces that led to Gaston's arrest were the accusations made by his sons Gustave and Clovis. They claimed their father was the man responsible for killing the Drummonds. In addition to the confessions Gaston made during his questioning, he also implicated members of his family in the crime. At various points during the investigation and trial, he accused Gustave, Clovis, and even his grandson Roger of involvement in the murders. These accusations fueled speculation that Gaston might have confessed falsely to protect his relatives from prosecution or punishment. One theory suggests that Gustave and Roger confronted Jack Drummond during the early hours of August 5th while armed with rifles after attending a party at La Grande Terre. According to this hypothesis, which gained traction after Police Commissioner Chenevier published his memoirs in 1976, a drunken altercation ensued between Jack and Gustave over their proximity to the campsite. Roger may have assisted in staging the crime scene afterward by rearranging objects around the campsite and discarding pieces of the murder weapon in the river. This theory aligns with certain forensic details from the crime scene, including the crepe-soled shoe prints that were found near Elizabeth's body, matching the shoes worn by Roger rather than Gaston. Ultimately, Gaston was convicted of intentional homicide based largely on his own statements rather than forensic proof or credible witness accounts. He was sentenced to death by guillotine, a punishment later commuted to life imprisonment by President René Coty in 1957 due to widespread criticism of judicial misconduct during the trial. To this day, significant doubts persist about whether Gaston was truly guilty or whether he confessed falsely to protect other members of his family. Some theorists argue that Gustave or Roger may have been responsible for the murders while Gaston took responsibility, believing his elderly age would shield him from harsh punishment. Others suggest external forces may have played a role in shaping Gaston's confessions. Investigators were accused of using coercive tactics during interrogations, including threats and intimidation, to extract statements from him despite his limited understanding of legal proceedings due to language barriers and illiteracy. If you've been following along with this iceberg series for a while now, you'll know that it is several years old. And since its creation, a handful of mysteries have been resolved. This next entry is one such case. Nevertheless, it's an interesting one, so I'm including it here at the end of the video. Alexander Litvinenko's assassination in 2006 remains one of the most infamous cases of political murder in modern history. The former Russian Federal Security Service officer was poisoned with polonium-210, a rare radioactive substance, in London. His death has been widely linked to Russian state-sponsored operations and continues to have significant geopolitical implications. Alexander was born on December 4, 1962 in Voronezh, Russia. After completing secondary school in 1980, he initially sought university admission but failed. Instead, he pursued a career in the military and enrolled at the Kirov Higher Command School in Vladikavkaz, an academy for prospective interior ministry officers. Graduating as a lieutenant in 1985, Alexander began his career with the Soviet Ministry of Internal Affairs. His early assignments included working as a platoon commander responsible for protecting valuable cargo during transit. In 1986, Alexander's career took a pivotal turn when he was recruited as an informant for the MVD's KGB counterintelligence section. By 1988, he officially joined the 3rd Chief Directorate of the KGB, specializing in military counterintelligence. After completing advanced training at the Novosibirsk Military Counterintelligence School, Alexander became an operational officer tasked with investigating threats to national security within military ranks. He remained in this role until 1991. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the subsequent reorganization of its intelligence agencies, Alexander transitioned to Russia's Federal Counterintelligence Service, which later became the Federal Security Service. He specialized in counterterrorism and infiltrating organized crime networks. His work earned him recognition as a MEUR veteran, a title awarded for operations conducted alongside Moscow's Criminal Investigation Department. Alexander also participated in active military operations during several conflicts across Russia and former Soviet territories. During the First Chechen War, he planted FSB agents within Chechnya to gather intelligence on separatist movements. While Western media often referred to him as a Russian spy, Alexander himself clarified that his role focused more on combating organized crime than traditional espionage. In 1994, he met Boris Berezovsky, a powerful oligarch and political figure who would later play a significant role in his life. At the time, Alexander was involved in investigating an assassination attempt against Boris. Following this investigation, he became responsible for Boris's personal security, a position that created tensions due to potential conflicts of interest between his duties for the FSB and his work for private individuals. This association marked the beginning of Alexander's exposure to high-level political intrigue. Boris was critical of Vladimir Putin's administration and would later support Alexander financially after his defection to Britain. Alexander rose through the ranks of the FSB and was promoted in 1997 to senior operational officer and deputy head of the 7th Section within the Directorate of Analysis and Suppression of Criminal Groups. However, his career took a dramatic turn in November 1998 when he publicly accused senior FSB officials of corruption during a press conference alongside other officers. Specifically, he alleged that his superiors had ordered him to assassinate Boris, a claim that shocked Russia's political establishment. The fallout from this press conference was swift. Alexander was dismissed from the FSB shortly afterward. Vladimir Putin, who was then head of the FSB, later stated that he personally ordered the dismissal because, quote, FSB officers should not stage press conferences or make internal scandals public. Alexander believed that Vladimir harbored personal animosity toward him and used this incident to distance himself from Boris while consolidating power within Russia's intelligence community. Following his dismissal, Alexander faced a series of legal challenges orchestrated by Russian authorities. In March 1999, he was arrested on charges of assaulting a suspect during an investigation, a charge widely seen as politically motivated, and detained for 8 months before being acquitted. When prosecutors attempted to bring new charges against him after his acquittal failed, Alexander realized that his position within Russia had become untenable. The repeated attempts to prosecute him culminated in his decision to flee Russia with his wife Marina and their young son Anatoly. In October 2000, defying orders not to leave Moscow, Alexander traveled with his family to Turkey via Ukraine. While in Turkey, he applied for asylum at the US Embassy in Ankara but was denied. With assistance from Alexander Goldfarb, a biologist and friend who would later become instrumental in advocating for justice after Alexander's death, he purchased tickets for an Istanbul-London-Moscow flight. During a transit stop at Heathrow Airport on November 1st, 2000, Alexander formally requested political asylum from British authorities. The UK granted him asylum on humanitarian grounds on May 14, 2001. According to Alexander himself, this decision was not based on any intelligence value he might offer, but rather on concerns about his safety following persecution by Russian authorities. In London, Alexander reinvented himself as an author, journalist, and consultant for British intelligence services such as MI6. He also worked with private security firms and advised Spanish intelligence on Russian organized crime networks operating abroad. Despite earning income through these roles, Alexander struggled financially at times, but received support from Boris. Alexander authored 2 books that accused Russian intelligence agencies of orchestrating acts of terrorism to consolidate power under Vladimir Putin's leadership. He also alleged connections between Russian officials and al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri during Zawahiri's visit to Dagestan in 1997. Alexander continued campaigning against Vladimir's government alongside Boris while contributing articles critical of Kremlin policies to a media outlet advocating for Chechen independence. In October 2006, just weeks before his death, Alexander became a naturalized British citizen. During this period, he accused Vladimir Putin of ordering the assassination of Anna Politkovskaya, a prominent journalist known for her investigations into human rights abuses during Russia's Chechen campaigns. These allegations further solidified his reputation as one of Vladimir's most outspoken critics, a position that made him increasingly vulnerable amid growing tensions between Russia and its exiled dissidents abroad. Fast forward to November 1st, 2006, Alexander met Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun, 2 Russian agents with connections to the FSB, at the Millennium Hotel's Pine Bar in London. During this meeting, Alexander consumed green tea that had been laced with polonium-210. The poison was introduced into the teapots used to prepare his drink, making it almost impossible for him to detect any foul play at the time. This meeting was not their first attempt to poison him. Investigators later discovered that Andrei and Dmitry had made 2 prior attempts in October 2006 using smaller doses of poison at other locations in London. Alexander began experiencing symptoms within hours of consuming the poisoned tea. He complained of acute abdominal pain, vomiting, and diarrhea, symptoms that initially mimicked those of common gastrointestinal illnesses such as food poisoning or gastroenteritis. These early signs were indistinguishable from exposure to other chemical toxins or infections, which delayed an accurate diagnosis. By November 3rd, Alexander's condition worsened significantly, prompting his admission to Barnet Hospital in North London. Over the following days, his symptoms escalated to include severe dehydration and persistent gastrointestinal distress. Medical staff initially suspected thallium poisoning due to its similar clinical presentation and began treating him accordingly. However, as his condition deteriorated further, marked by hair loss, bone marrow failure, and mucositis, it became clear that he had been exposed to a far more lethal substance. The turning point in diagnosing Alexander's condition came on November 22nd, when urine samples analyzed using gamma-ray spectroscopy revealed characteristic emissions consistent with polonium-210 poisoning. The concentration of polonium in his body was found to be approximately 1 billion times higher than normal background levels, a staggering amount that confirmed deliberate ingestion. Subsequent post-mortem analyses estimated that Alexander had ingested around 4 gigabecquerels of the substance on November 1st. This dose was approximately 200 times greater than the median lethal dose for ingestion. Investigators also discovered traces of polonium contamination at over 40 locations across London, including hotel rooms, restaurants, vehicles, and even airplanes used by Andrei and Dmitry during their travels. These findings revealed 3 distinct contamination trails left by the assassins during their attempts to poison Alexander. The first attempt occurred on October 16th at Irenis International's office in Mayfair and later at Itsu Sushi restaurant in Piccadilly Circus. On this occasion, Alexander ingested far less polonium than during the final attempt, but still felt unwell afterward. On November 23rd, Alexander passed away after suffering cardiac arrest from pulseless electrical activity, a direct result of systemic toxicity from the polonium. Hours before his death, he dictated a statement accusing Russian officials directly of ordering his assassination, a claim that would later become central to investigations into his murder. Shortly after his passing, police launched their investigation. The inquiry was led by the Counterterrorism Command under Deputy Assistant Commissioner Peter Clark. Initially, Alexander's death was treated as unexplained, but once polonium was identified as the cause, it became a full-fledged murder investigation. Clark emphasized that investigators would trace Alexander's movements leading up to his illness, identify people he had met, and examine CCTV footage for clues. The discovery of the substance in Alexander's body triggered a major security alert across London. The UK government convened its Cobra Emergency Committee 4 times in the week following the poisoning to assess public safety risks. Investigators found traces of polonium contamination at over 40 locations in London, including hotels, restaurants, vehicles, and even airplanes. This widespread contamination underscored the gravity of the situation and raised concerns about potential harm to the public. From early in the investigation, Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun emerged as prime suspects. Both men had ties to Russian intelligence services. Andrei was a former FSB agent who maintained strong connections to Moscow's security apparatus, while Dmitry had served as a soldier in Russia's Red Army before becoming a businessman. Their movements during their visits to London aligned closely with instances of polonium contamination. Investigators concluded that the two acted under orders from Russia's FSB. Sir Robert Owen's public inquiry report in 2016 stated that their actions were probably directed by FSB Director Nikolai Patrushev. The use of polonium-210 was deemed a strong indicator of state involvement. Despite overwhelming evidence implicating Andrei and Dmitry in Alexander's murder, efforts to bring them to justice faced significant obstacles. In May 2007, the UK Crown Prosecution Service formally charged Andrei with murder and requested his extradition from Russia. However, Russia refused to comply with the request, citing constitutional prohibitions against extraditing its citizens. Russia's refusal sparked diplomatic tensions between Moscow and London. In July 2007, both nations expelled diplomats in tit-for-tat moves that further strained relations. Russia later proposed trying Andrei domestically if Britain provided sufficient evidence, a suggestion dismissed by UK authorities due to concerns about impartiality. In September 2021, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Russia was responsible for Alexander Litvinenko's assassination. The court found beyond reasonable doubt that Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun acted as agents of the Russian state. However, despite formal charges, neither man was arrested as Russia repeatedly refused to extradite them.